And so this class is sacred contracts and your personal archetypes. And your personal archetypes are universal, actually, but some of those archetypes show up more strongly, in some people than others. We're going to explore exactly what contracts are in place in your life, and then who are the archetypal characters who help you navigate those contracts, and also to help you have certain experiences that you yourself wouldn't ordinarily have. So possibly there's an archetype within your framework that's a part of your round table, if you like. You can imagine that you have a group of characters kind of sitting around your round table who will elect one of those characters to fulfill a certain purpose. So typically they're not all driving at the same time. Usually one person or situation or one aspect of your life will call in the energies of one particular archetype. And so out of these archetypes there are what are called the survival archetypes. And so we each share those survival archetypes. And the survival archetypes are in place in order to protect us. But their protection can also cause chaos. So it's really good to have an understanding of these entities, of these energies, of these archetypes that are playing out, that are acting out in your life. They'll get into the driver's seat and and you'll be, going, what? Wait, how is this happening? How did I get here? What? And so you find yourself kind of going along for the ride. So this is a really useful conversation to have as as you're on your quest to know yourself. And so in knowing yourself, you're taking steps towards congruency. And congruency equals peace. So really, whatever it is that you thought you came here for, really deep down what you're seeking is peace. And so this is just a conversation that we get to have, a little bit of inquiry, a little bit of an adventure as we go exploring into your nature. And so things might move. Self-realization creates movement. Energy moving. So you have your physical nature. And your physical nature is your physical body. And so your physical body is made up of different molecules and atoms. And at the gross level it becomes, the blood and the bones and the muscles and the tissue and the organs, and you have the grey matter of your brain. And so that's your experience of your physical nature that has it has an energy to it. And so it has movement, right? As you experience your physical nature, even if you feel very still, there's always something moving. Your heart's beating, and the blood's pumping, and your stomach is digesting, and the food is moving. So there's a lot happening in your physical nature, actually. And it's a wonderland. So it's actually a little bit sad that we don't spend much time really in our bodies. So where do we spend our time? We spend our time in story. We spend our time creating illusion through the stories that we tell ourselves about the past remembered, about the future projected. And this is the cause of our suffering, and it is the cause of our mental pathologies. So what everybody is doing is casting spells as they create their illusory world through their thoughts about the world. And so the archetypes live in the realm of story. So they have a personality, and they have a language, they have a certain attitude. So for example, if I said, he's a bully, so your mind will create a story about that. And everybody knows what a bully means. Even though we don't know exactly, but we can get, we get a sense of what that means energetically and what happens out of that. Or what if I were to say, she's such a princess? And so you get an idea, and it's a universal one. We could agree. We could discuss it and say, she's such a princess, and oh yeah, she definitely is. So we can agree because we have a universal idea about what that is. So the archetypes get fed to us or reflected back to us through our entertainment, through TV shows, and through movies, through legends and myths. And so we inherit them. We've inherited them through our language, actually, through our culture. So you weren't born with them. When you were born as an aliveness, innocent, and free. And then somebody told you that you were, your name. So somebody said to me that you are an Australian Andrea. And then at some point, I believed them. At some point, I agreed. And around that same time, or a little bit before, my consciousness started to, through the volition of my physical nature, through my senses, through my listening, and through my seeing, and through my feeling, started to discern that there is me, there is this, and there is other. There is mama, and papa, and cup, and floor. And so there's the discernment from this to that, and then at the same time, around the same time, I believed my name, and then I started to learn language. I started to learn language internally, and then in time I probably started to speak it too. So it's through language that we have our stories, and that's why your archetypes will speak to you in a certain language. So I guess in the beginning, we're just introducing what's at play here. So in the beginning, just this week, just begin to pay attention to the different voices in your head, or just to the voices in your head, and perhaps ask yourself, are they different? And is a certain attitude cultivated as a result of the voice that's playing in my head? Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle, so the voice in your head might actually be arguing about the apparent reality of what's happening. So that means that there's another archetype that's working in the background that another archetype will be arguing about, which is what you've been experiencing this week. And so in a way, this is why this conversation is really important, because you'll find that your inner conflicts are as a result of these different archetypes working out their independent agendas. But the important thing to remember is that it's all for your highest good, actually. Everything that is at play is conspiring for you to remember your true inherent nature, and for you to fulfill your soul's purpose and your soul's gifts here. So sometimes it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way all the time. And when it doesn't feel that way all the time, it's because the shadow is in play. The archetypes are neutral energies, actually. But when they're out of their neutrality, there is a light aspect and there is the shadow aspect. But from their original state, from their origination, they're neutral energies. And this, I think, is important to remember from the beginning, because as neutral energies, they don't have a charge. So you can access the gifts of the archetype by remembering that they are inherently neutral. So if a shadow aspect has risen up, and when the shadow aspect arises, its only function from its point of view is to protect you, is to protect the mechanism, is to protect the organism, or protect its story, actually. So keep that in mind, because what we're actually talking about through story, we're actually accessing our inner alchemy. And you experience the alchemy of the archetypes through how you feel, through the emotions and the attitudes that are born out of it. So this conversation is acknowledging that we are universally spellcasters. We perpetuate myths through the stories that we tell. And so this conversation is really about kind of busting those myths, exposing those myths, so that you can find the reality of what's here. And the reality of your nature is found in the congruency, when the round table comes together as a whole, when there's nothing to defend, nothing to protect, where everything is seen for as it is, not as you think it should be. And so the umbrella force is your contracts. So your contracts. You know you have a contract when there is a relationship in your life, or it could be a workplace, but there's something in your life that grabs you, that grips your attention. There's so much that goes on in our lives that we don't give mind to at all. We don't pay attention to. But our contracts show up. Our contracts are easy to spot because they're just simply the things that are obvious in our lives. So you clearly have a contract with your spouse to be your spouse. You clearly have contracts with your children to be your children. You have contracts with your parents to be your parents. You have contracts with your dearest friends to be your dearest friends. I have a contract with little Sophie here. And I have a contract with you. And you have a contract with me. Because we're traveling together, at this time together. We're getting to be what we are in this moment for each other. Sometimes they stay a while, these contracts. They're in place. They seem to be operating on a timeline. And, especially the parents, right? Children. And sometimes it's not for a long while. Sometimes it's just for a little instant. You might have an interaction with somebody and their job was just to tell you this one thing. And maybe it was just somebody standing in line at the supermarket or next to you at the doctor's office, and their job, their contract with you was just to tell you that one thing, and that was it. And so I want you to just ride with me for a little bit, because what I want you to see is that each of these characters that you've invited in to your life to play out this contract, I want you to see them not as people, but as little sparks of light. Little sparks of light, a little diamond, or a little sparkly, a piece of a crystal maybe. You know, when you look at a geode, and they've got that crystal, and you could kind of pull that out and make a piece of jewelry out of it or something. So maybe see them more like that, just a piece of crystal. So take away their matter, the physical body, but just what we're doing is just kind of seeing in our mind's eye the possibility that these characters are inherently a spark of light, just part of a greater gem. And so see if you can see how you too are a spark of light. You too are a gem. That at one time came from this one gemstone. It came from a whole gemstone at one time. Or imagine that there was, for example, this beautiful pane of glass, and then that glass shattered into tiny little pieces. And so each piece is individual, but it came from that greater pane of glass. So imagine or see if you can grasp. I'm just using analogies and metaphors. I'm using story to help us remember who we are. Because that's how we communicate, that's how we do things here. And so see if from the point of view of that piece of glass, or from the point of view of that beautiful whole crystal, that it remembered itself as whole. It never forgot itself, even when those individual crystal pieces got taken out, or when the glass pane shattered and there's, pieces everywhere. So imagine that from that crystal's point of view, that original crystal, or that original pane of glass point of view, it never forgot its wholeness, even when it became separate. So those individual separate pieces are your people. They're your characters. And so from that whole pane of glass point of view, or from that whole gem stone's point of view, it's all you, actually. So you all committed as separate pieces. So now from the separate pieces point of view, you said to each other, okay, we have to remember our wholeness. We have to remember who we are. Okay, yeah, let's do that. I'll help you remember. Okay, good, because I'll help you remember too. Okay, good. So that's what our people are for. Their job, their vocation, their contract with us is to help us remember who we are. And how they help us to remember who we are is quite paradoxical, actually. So, for example, let's say I needed to remember that I am inherently abundant, that I'm inherently grand in nature, that my spirit, that my life force is massive and abundant and generous, that I'm only ever always whole. But in the trauma of becoming separate, I forgot. So I need a soul companion. I have a contract in place. I put a contract in place with somebody to help me remember that about myself. But in the trauma of separation, in that fracturing, the trauma of the fracture, I forgot, and I lived out my story. The myths I created reflected that forgetting. So the myths that I created is that I'm not enough, I don't have enough, I'm broken, I'm sick, I'm tired. These are the myths that we create for ourselves. This is the illusion, the spell casting. And so I put somebody in place. So let's say I needed to remember my inherent abundance and generosity. And so I might put somebody in place, I might make a contract with somebody to be selfish and stingy, to be a taker. And so then in the realm of the story, from the fragment's point of view, we'll go to war. We'll go to war with them. And we'll cut them off and cut them out for being selfish and stingy. Because what they're actually teaching through their stinginess, through their lack of generosity, through their selfishness, is where I too have forgotten my wholeness, my abundance. And so I too am stingy and selfish in the face of their stinginess and their selfishness and their lack of generosity. Because I can't be generous enough in my spirit to hold their being. And so somehow they get to reflect my broken thinking, my illusory thinking, back at me. And that helps me to remember what's truly true. And what's truly true is that I'm actually inherently whole, inherently expansive and abundant in nature. That's what I am, that's what this is. And so the deeper inquiry, by showing me, by me putting somebody in place who is the opposite, it helps me to remember that which is true, that which I am. So what happens is, in your everyday life, when you meet somebody who is stingy or selfish, you will make a mental note, and you will, in the moment, you'll be stingy and selfish to them, in the face of their stinginess and their selfishness, because you can't help it. But you will also make a commitment that I won't ever be like that. I don't want to be like that. And so then you might parent differently, or you might treat other people differently. So this is what the contracts are in place for. They're in place to show your illusions, to show your myths, but they're also there to help you remember who you and what you truly are. And you're doing this actually. You're actually playing this out. This conversation is real. So anybody that you have judged or have pain around, you put there. You ask them to be that for you, to help you remember who you truly are in all the facets of your nature, in all the aspects, the facets of that gem, every shape of that shard of glass. And it's the classic story of unrequited love. So we all have a story of when we fell in love with somebody and then they didn't love us back in the way that we wanted. And so that's a classic case where we've put somebody in place in order to not give us what we want. Or they've put us in place to not give them what they think they want. And so the mind creates the illusion that they should somehow give you what you think you want. That's one. But if somebody doesn't give you what you want, then what's left? You know, what are you forced to do?
To get it somewhere else, or to change what you're looking for.
Forced to go somewhere else? Yes, and the true direction, that's what ends up happening. Because we are spellcasters and we believe our myths. So we believe, for example, the myth of we should be partnered, that there's somebody out there for all of us. There's our perfect person who's out there for all of us. So we will follow that direction. We'll look for that somebody else. But because there's only one, it's an invitation to find that which we are looking for in somebody else in our own nature. So they don't give us what we want, the approval, the love, the attention, because that's ours to give to ourselves, first and foremost. But because we haven't been taught to be emotionally self-sufficient, we haven't been taught to question our own myths and the inherited ones. We do keep going from, like a bee, from one flower to the next flower until we find, you know, the one. The important thing at this very early stage is to remember their inherent innocence, that they're actually just doing the job that you ask them to do. And your inherent innocence. Because as innocent as they are, you are. And so at some point, as we navigate our lives, we feel fragmented. We feel that fragmented part of ourselves, the edge of us. And so there's a part that kind of wakes up and says, but you know, there must be something more to this. It can't be this. It can't be just about edges and suffering and discomfort and loving with conditions, which is really hating. My life can't be about that. There has to be something war cannot be my inherent nature. It cannot be. I'm experiencing this life as that because I love with condition. So at some point there's a part that wakes up to this and it asks a question. And this question is, there has to be another way. And that one that's asking that question is the one that got you here. Because it's begging to know the truth. It's begging for your illusions and your myths to be busted. For the light of your true nature to shine through, so that you can remember who you are and what your inherent purpose here is, what your soul's gifts are, so that your energy can be used for creativity, for that creative flow, as opposed to being spent protecting your edges. So you have a bigger contract. So you've made these sweet contracts with your other fragments so that you can remember the wholeness of the jewel of your nature. But you also made a bigger contract. You made a contract with the God of your understanding, God consciousness, the part that oversees all of this. And so let me just pause here and explain what I mean by God. And I'm going to use Sophie here because it's the best metaphor that I found. So Sophie has a heart, it beats. She's got bones and muscles. And she has an intelligence. And she's arrived here with gifts, with dog gifts that we don't have. So she has a superior sense of smell. She has a psychic ability that, we don't have. She's in tune with nature in a way that we aren't, because we've been so busy chronically and sometimes acutely believing our myths, our stories, our illusions. So the thing about Sophie, for example, is that she does know some language, or at least she knows sounds. That sounds equate to a certain experience. So for example, she does know the word car. So I don't know exactly what that is for her, but it equates to a certain experience. And so she knows what it is to experience that. So from my point of view, she sits in the car, and the experience of car is that somehow mysteriously, miraculously, she enters in one place and then pops out at another place. Miraculously. It's like a time machine from her point of view. Because she doesn't do anything for that. She goes in and she pops out. Totally new experience, new smells, new bodies, new experiences. Over time, these places where she pops out become familiar. So she doesn't know the workings of the car, because her experience of it is limited. It's finite. She doesn't know, for example, that the car needs petrol, needs gas. But she has been to a gas station, so she smelled the smells. She doesn't know that it requires money to pay for the petrol. So she doesn't understand that I need to work and receive that money in order to put that petrol in the car. She doesn't understand banking, though she has been to a bank. She doesn't understand minting, the Federal Reserve, the market economy. And yet she is a part of all those things. So those systems and those networks are all existing, and she's a part of that existence, and yet she doesn't have the conscious awareness of it. So all of that is mystical to her. It's mysticism. It's magic. So what we are, what all of those systems are, those networks at place, those energies at place, that are actually, when we look at it, conspiring to support her life. Almost everything that I do is conspiring to support her life. And she does nothing for it. So on her little page, the Sophie the Boston Terrier Facebook page, I often use the hashtag dog is God backwards. Because it's true. So in addition, I even pick up her poo. She's not making up mine. So it seems like, if we were to look at it, that actually everything is conspiring to support her life. Your life is contributing to supporting her life. Everything that you do that contributes to mine contributes to hers. And then she poops, and that fertilizes the ground and the grass.
Except if you pick it up and it ends up in the trash.
Well, eventually it's going to affect something. It's going to fertilize something somewhere down the line. But so, can you see? So that's what we are. We're the Sophie. And so that's what I mean by God. Because there are systems in place. We're part of a much bigger network that we have no cognizance of, that we have no idea about, that we cannot possibly understand. But there's always something that comes before. There's something that comes before, something that comes before, something that comes before, something that comes before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. And we can't know what that is. But we can begin by asking what. And that's why we can look at Sophie and ask what. And that inquiry will take us into God's nature. Because what comes before? We can look at anything and ask what. And find God there. So that's why I often use the language of the God of your understanding, because it has to be the God of your experience. The God in your own cells, that which has all of this working, your heart beating when you don't even ask it to, your blood pumping, you don't tell it to, food digesting. So we're part of this much greater system, this much greater network, this much greater consciousness. This what came before, what came before, what came before, it gets subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler. And it goes beyond our conscious understanding because it's not where we live. So we're a part of it, but we cannot understand it. So, that which you were born out of, before, whatever that is to you, there's a contract in place. It seems to be that the main contract is to remember your inherent wholeness. It seems to be what everything is conspiring for, conspiring to. And then there are ways, there are energies on how to do that, on how to help us remember our inherent wholeness, that we're not a fragment actually, that we're born out of a greater gem. And so there's energies that help us remember love, patience, compassion, generosity, humor, knowledge, wisdom, truth, light. And then we have the shadows of all of those. They're also our teachers. So out of those, and there are probably more, so if any are bubbling up, you can write them down. So out of those, what feels most right to you that you came here to be for us, for the fragment? We have love, we have truth, we have patience, we have generosity, we have humor, we have light, we have beauty, we have artistry, creative flow, wisdom, knowledge, truth, light. And it might help to think back to when you were small, to when you were, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. Because that was you in the early stages of the myth building. So how did you play? What was your state of grace at that time? How did you express? Were you a loving child? Were you a naturally expressing child? Were you a naturally creative child? Were you constantly seeking understanding? You're asking why? And you can also find your contract through observation, by observing that which you don't give others. So they might be coming to you and looking to you for that, and you just cannot give it to them. And it may be approval, it may be love, it may be attention, it may be your time, it may be your physical body. In the form of, that unrequited love story that we were talking about a little while ago. So for example, if somebody is seeking approval from you, then that is what you are. So what comes before approval for you? So the approval might be one of the energies of love or compassion. And so this week, start thinking about the characters that you're attracted to in our universal stories, in our universal myths. So you're looking at movies that you like, characters in these specific movies, legends, Bible stories, historical figures that you have an affinity towards, that you particularly admire. So just start thinking about your preferences, what you're attracted to, what you're drawn to in terms of characters. If you want to, you could also make a separate list of characters that you find repelling. So for example, for me as a child, I found cruelty very distressing. So bullying was very, very stressful for me. And yet I can find times when I was the bully as a child. We're looking at these archetypes, they're energies actually, but we're getting very honest about it. So we're looking at the ones that we have preference for, but it also might be useful to have a second list for those that are repelling, and to get really honest about it to see if, you know, well, actually, does it live in me to... Some of the characters could be the crone, the wizard, the jester, the queen, the king, the warrior, the advocate, the judge, the artist, the poet, the scribe, the miser, the maven. So many. For now this week, just start thinking about your history. Historically, what have you been attracted to? What's your preference? Or what have you been historically repelled by, naturally, for you as an individual? And make a note of those. And so then next week we'll be exploring the 4 universal survival archetypes that we all have. And then we'll take a closer look at getting an idea of who your round table consists of. Okay, so see you next week.